Good morning, and welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are going to begin with our opening congregational song. And we have Dr. Jean Heinrich on the piano today. Jean, could you tell us what we're going to start singing?
We're going to start with I'm in between songs, bouncing back and forth in my head. Let's start with Come and Go With Me to That Land. And I think you all probably all know these words, right? So if I can get everybody to stand up in body and spirit and taking a deep breath and reach up while you do it. And let it out and sigh. And again, breathe. And sigh. Okay, so we're going to do Come and Go With Me to That Land. There is justice in that land. Okay?
Welcome to the First Existentialist Congregation of Atlanta. We are a spiritual community philosophically based on existentialist and feminist principles, dedicated to human liberation. We make our spiritual home here in the Old Stone Church, which was hand-built by the African American Antioch East Baptist Church. We acknowledge that racial hostility drove those African Americans from the area, and we honor them and the powerful history of this place. We also acknowledge that in the 1800s, the Muscogee Creek people were driven from this land, and we support justice for all Indigenous people. My name is Patton White, and I will be facilitating this morning's celebration of life. Our opening words start off as such. So this is information acquired by me from a somatics practitioner named Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who developed a body of work that she calls body-mind centering. And there are several different systems within the body that she examines, and one of them is the organs system. Organs are the contents within our skeletal flesh container. Occupying our inner space, they provide us with our sense of volume and full-bodiedness, and inner vitality and support for our skeletal alignment. As the primary habitats of our emotions, aspirations, and memories of our past experiences, the organs imbue our movement with personal involvement and meaning. The movement of mind within and through an organ reveals the specific mind of that organ. Through experiencing the mind of the organs, universal symbols and myths are recognized. It is through this recognition that empathy is established, that universal feelings are recognized with the context of one's own life, and that we understand and know. And with today's topic, I'm focusing on the heart and the lungs. The heart is the organ of circulation and relationship, the warmth of passion and compassion, being open and closed to others, love, hate, authenticity, true to oneself, generosity, awareness and action filtered through qualities of fire and magnetism. And the lungs are the organs of breathing and taking in and giving out of life. Lightness, buoyancy, suffering loss of life or grief, and celebrating abundance of life or joy. Inspiration, awareness and action filtered through qualities of air. So I would like to invite you to take a moment to close your eyes and to place your hands on either your heart or your lungs, and consider why you might have selected that particular organ, and directing breath into that organ, noticing where your emotions lie, what you're feeling, what you're sensing. No judgment, simply observing. And then allow that organ, the mind of that organ, to continue to be present with you throughout the rest of our time together today. All right, so moving on to our next part of our celebration of life. Do we have anyone who's here for the first time, or perhaps the second time? And would you like to let us know who you are and how you came to be with us this morning?
Well, we're from Berkeley, California. We got recommended, you got recommended to us, so that's why we're here, and our plane was late, or else we would have been on a plane.
And can you share your names with us?
Oh, I'm Maxine Schroge.
Karen Barber, and our daughter Julia, who will be here in a minute, just graduated from the nursing school at Emory, so that's why we're here.
Oh, great.
Well, welcome.
Welcome.
We're glad to have you with us this morning. Any other first-timers, second-timers? All right, then, do we have any birthdays or anniversaries to celebrate today? Okay, moving on to our next congregational song, which Jean would like to let us know what it's going to be.
It's page 104, Down by the Riverside. And we're not going to do the words in the book, so, you know.
Jean,
so let's do.
how unusual for you to make that selection.
Be here now. Heads up. So let's do, I'm going to lay down my burden down by the riverside. And then the next verse, I'm going to lay down my sword and shield. Could I invite you all to stand up?
Rise and body your spirit as you were willing and able.
And once again, reach up and take a real deep breath. And sigh as you let it out. And again. Great. Good. Okay. I'm going to lay down my burden.
If anyone has any community announcements that they would like shared at the end of our celebration of life this morning, please write them down and pass them to me before the end of our time together. At this time, I'd like to welcome our fellowship minister, Reverend Marcia Mitchner, to come forward and make use of our handheld mic down here to share any of the comments you'd like to share.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. It's good to see y'all this morning on this very rainy day in Georgia. But it's nice to have you here. And we actually do have a birthday, Jean. Today is the birthday of our founding minister, Reverend Barbara Lanier Clance. Lanier founded this congregation back in 1976 with the support of Pauline Clance and Zimov, and he gathered together some folks that wanted to talk about life, that wanted to not talk about dogma, but to think about how existential philosophy could help us to get through each day, to be better and happier in this world. And here we are, 46 years later, so Reverend Lanier retired, and subsequently has passed away. But I think that could not let this day go by without us really thinking about Lanier and the gift that he gave us, which is something that, for me personally, has been one of the greatest gifts that I've ever received, because it gave me a whole new way of looking at life and being in a world that has made my life so much more joyful and full. So this is just a reminder that even though Reverend Clance is not with us in the body, that some of us, who we are today, is very much because of the man that he was and the gifts that he gave us, and the fact that we have this wonderful congregation to continue his work. So I think that'll do it for me today.
Thank you, Marcia. At this time, we're going to move into our time of silence, a brief period of time where we are in silence and community with one another. We have candles on either side of the sanctuary if you would like to make use of them. But enjoy this time as you so desire. It is time for another congregational song. Jean, what are we going to sing?
I want us to, this will be an experiment. I want us to sing, "We let the love wash over us. We let it be." And then we change it to "We let the peace wash," and all that. But, so, if I could get you all to stand for a minute, because you're going to table, and We let it be. Okay? That's one part. So there's that. Let's just sing that. We let the love wash over us. We let it be. Good. Okay, then here's another part. We let the love wash over us. We let it be. Okay? So pick a part, and if you hear another part, sing that part. This is an experiment. Give yourself permission to sing with commitment and with spirit. And don't worry so much about the notes. Lanier Clance could never sing on key. But boy, he got this place full of music because of his spirit, right? Those of you that know him, okay. So let me just play it through and you can hear your part. you all can, it's a happy song. So I'm guessing you will understand that I can't say anything else because of our non-profit status. But it reminded me again of something like one of my great professors taught me. And so I'm going to play it and sing it. And follow along, and if you get in the groove, please join in. Okay? It's an experiment. So we'll see how this goes. And I'd love it if you joined in.
Thank you, Jean. And thank you to all who contributed to our collection this morning. Our featured speaker today is John Herman. John Herman is a recently retired associate professor of religious studies at Georgia State University, where he taught classes in Asian religion, comparative mysticism, and critical theory in the study of religion. He is the author of Taoism for Dummies and several articles on topics such as interfaith dialogue, contemporary conceptions of spirituality, religious studies and public education, environmentalism, Neo-Confucian mysticism, and the late science fiction author Ursula K. Le Guin. He is currently researching for a book on the Jewish existentialist author Martin Buber's unpublished lectures on the Taoist classic, the Tao Te Ching. During his retirement, John has been authoring Herman's Tote Board, a liberal blog offering election analysis and political commentary. You can find the blog at www.thetoteboard.org. Please join me in welcoming Dr. John Herman.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I visual? You know, I have to say that I've always dreamed about coming up here, sort of stalking the podium and beginning a talk by saying, "Let me hear you say yeah." But I was going to say, I don't think that's my style, but maybe it works. I don't know. I want to thank you for having me here again. It's always nice to come back here. And I'm really honored to be here on Lanier's birthday. Does anyone know how old he would have been? Well, we can find that out for later. And I'm also really grateful to be here on a day with such extraordinary music. So thank you again for having me here for that. A friend of mine a good friend of mine is actually here today. And he was somebody who our initial connection was sharing interest in Martin Buber and I and Thou and dialogical philosophy. And it didn't hurt that our 9-year-old daughters got along with each other, but we also found that we had shared interests in pacifist philosophy and social justice and ethics, Chinese philosophy and mysticism, politics, baseball. But I haven't been able to interest him in the Three Stooges, which is unfortunate. Nevertheless, in our many wide-ranging conversations, he will once in a while ask me, so what do you read or what are you reading for inspiration? And I find that I usually come up with a goose egg and sort of scratch my head and say, I don't think I'm reading anything for inspiration. And so maybe I'm here under false pretenses, because I'm probably going to talk less about finding inspiration and more about struggling with not finding inspiration, or the difficulties of finding inspiration. I tend to read, by the way, in answer to my friend's question, I've been reading a lot of sort of historical biographies lately, sometimes from historical figures. I was reading about Bayard Rustin and Marcus Garvey, Clarence Darrow. But before you get the feeling that I'm some egghead, I also read biographies of Buster Keaton and the Smothers Brothers and Alan Sherman. Does anybody remember Alan Sherman? Yeah, and his version of Down by the Riverside became Don't Buy the Liverwurst. And while I would say I found inspiring stories in some of this stuff, like the time in 1931 in Jacksonville, Florida, when Mo Howard of the Three Stooges stood up to the racism of the community and promptly got the boys thrown out of their vaudeville gig and blacklisted by the managers there, or when Harpo Marx defended a or interceded on behalf of a military person who was receiving vicious anti-Semitic slurs from his sergeant. So I would say that there's some inspiration to be found in that, but that's not really, I don't know how far one can run with that level of inspiration. And part of it is that as kind of an academic, I do have kind of a confusion about what we even mean when we say inspiration, or what it means to inspire. I think that, like, literally it means something like infusion, or to be infused with spirit, or the Spirit. But words like spirit, spirituality, despite the fact that I'm in a spiritual community right now, have always made me uncomfortable. Not because I'm offended by the terms or anything like that, but because they feel vague to me. They feel less descriptive and more emotive. I'm never quite sure what people mean when they say something like spirituality or even inspiration. And so I noticed, for instance, several different examples of how people talk about inspiration. I was inspired to go to the gym and get some exercise. I was inspired to write an article for the Three Stooges Journal this month. And we usually, I suppose in those cases, the word inspire means something like motivated. But we also say something like when Harry Burnett Rees, about 100 years ago, he was working for the Hershey Chocolate Company, got the idea, he was inspired to combine chocolate and peanut butter in a single candy, which lives on to this day. Yeah, really. That in that case, inspiration probably means something like a creative impulse or feeling a creative impulse. Brian Snitker, the manager of the Braves, was inspired to pinch hit William Contreras for Eddie Rosario in the 7th inning of a close game. And in that case, inspiration probably means something like to sense something intuitively. There was an inspiring story on CNN about a college basketball player who has one arm and scored his first points in a game the other day. And I think one can even say that people like Michael Schwerner and James Chaney and Andrew Goodman, who were inspired by Martin Luther King to do civil rights work and to register people to vote in the South, in that case, the inspiration that they got from Martin Luther King was to be moved to a greater cause, to emulate an important figure. So these are all different understandings of what we mean by inspiration. They all seem to talk about, or they all seem to suggest some quality of uplifting, elevating, moving beyond, moving towards higher capacities, whether we're talking about intellectually or ethically or aesthetically, and I might add even existentially. To become more present to become more alive to something is in some ways to be kind of inspired. So on the one hand, I have this kind of confusion about some of the multiple meanings of inspiration, but I think that I can work with that. But I also have to be kind of confessional and say that I'm not sure that inspiration comes easily for me these days in this world. It's a world that is increasingly dehumanizing in a lot of ways, where opportunities for meaning and connection seem rarer and harder to come by. We have the rise of white supremacy and xenophobia, violence, gun violence, including last month at Club Q in Colorado. Really epidemic proportions of depression and anxiety among young people, among students. That's really the canary in the coal mine of something seriously messed up. And it's hard in some ways for me to find inspiration being aware of such troubled times. But in addition to that, and we're all living through troubled times, I think that I personally don't always have an easy penchant for inspiration. In some ways I identify with the character in Annie Hall, when Woody Allen has the flashback to his childhood, and he's a little boy brought to the psychiatrist who is deep in depression because he's just learned that the universe is expanding. And he explains the universe is everything. And if it's expanding, someday it will break apart, and that will be the end of everything. And so now he won't do his homework anymore. Because what's the point? And there is a way in which I would say even my clinical approach to the study of religion. I've read some very, very inspiring things like Martin Buber and Taoist philosophy, but I have been moving toward more social scientific analysis of it and contextualizing it and relating it to critical theory, that I tend not to read it as much for inspiration. Once you have adopt this kind of scientific, academic, intellectual approach, once had a student say to me, "Are you always this way?" As opposed to like just in the classroom. Was it just an act and theory and method class? And it's like, no, that's really how I engage the world. And when one adopts that approach, it can be a little bit like the Zen Kyoto School philosopher Keiji Nishitani wrote when he was describing what science has done to humankind. He said it's turned our world into a greenhouse with all the windows shattered, or an egg with a broken shell. That sort of the dark side, or the dark spin on existentialism. This is all there is, and it sucks kind of existentialism. And in a world with COVID and violence and a lot of things happening, it is sometimes hard for me to reverse that. And I think part of it is this sense that one can find inspiration, one can find uplifting things. But as the Buddhists tell us, they are impermanent, they are temporary. A friend of mine many years ago, a friend way back from my days in divinity school in Boston, was telling me how she attended a funeral, a Jewish funeral, for a friend of hers. And that if you've ever been to a Jewish funeral, you know that there's not a lot of, at least they're in a better place. There's a lot of, this place is really bad because of what just happened. This place is really injured by the loss. And there's acknowledgement of mourning and pain and grieving. And as she put it, and I think she was probably being a little bit metaphorical, but she said her friends were all wailing and moaning and writhing on the floor. And they did all the proper mourning rituals, and they did everything by the numbers. And then afterward, one turned to the others and said, "Damn it, she's still dead." That all of the uplifting, palliatory things that we can take part in don't reverse those concerns. And I think if I can put it very darkly, but don't worry, I'll turn it up soon. During troubled times, it can really feel like there's trouble waiting to undo inspiration. You can have the inspiration, but the trouble is waiting for us. Nevertheless, just a few weeks ago, I felt moved. I'm trying to decide what the right way of phrasing it. I felt an urge to go watch a 5-minute video on YouTube. And this was just a few days before Stell contacted me and asked me if I would pinch hit today. And so it seemed like the cosmic forces were aligned. And it's a video that I had seen before. It's a video recording of an event that happened, almost 55 years ago. And that I actually remembered it happening at the time, even though I was quite young. And after seeing the video, I went to my wife, Ellen, whom some of you have met, and I said, Kipton's always asking me what I read for inspiration. This video inspired me. This video inspires me. So maybe you'd like to know what that video is? And I'll have to invoke a little bit of history here. On April 4th, 1968, I don't know if anyone remembers the significance of that day, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And Robert Kennedy was less than 3 weeks into his presidential campaign and was attending rallies at different places in Indiana. And he was scheduled that evening to speak in Indianapolis. Not just Indianapolis, but 17th and Broad, to set up at that corner, which was deep in the heart of impoverished black neighborhood. I suppose they called it the ghetto in those days. Very, very heavy crime in that area. And it was literally after attending other rallies and on his way to this event in Indianapolis that he learned about Martin Luther King. And was advised, many of his advisors felt he should cancel the rally. The chief of police and the mayor of Indianapolis, future Senator Dick Lugar, basically told him, you're moving into a dangerous situation and we can't protect you. But he insisted on going anyway. And they set up a makeshift flatbed truck, and he spoke for 5 minutes, largely impromptu. He rejected the notes that his handlers gave him and spoke to the people in the audience who were assembled who had not heard yet about King. In fact, you hear in the recording, you hear Kennedy speak to someone off stage, off camera, saying, do they know about Martin Luther King? And if you'll indulge me, I'd like to read Robert Kennedy's words. With a minimal commentary from me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm only going to talk to you just for a minute or so this evening, because I have some very sad news for all of you. He then asked if people take down some signs that were, I think, blocking his view or people's view of him, probably campaign signs. And he started again and said, I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. There was audible wailing from the audience at that point. He then continued, Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings, and he died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it is perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks, white people amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and to replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poet was Aeschylus, and he once wrote, Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, and a feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. So I ask you tonight to return home, to say a prayer for the family of Martin Luther King. That's true. But more importantly, to say a prayer for our own country, which all of us love, a prayer for understanding and that compassion of which I spoke. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, and we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence, it is not the end of lawlessness, and it is not the end of disorder. His voice was shaking somewhat at this point. He said, but the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings who abide in our land. And dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. And then he thanked the audience. And that night, there was widespread violence, rioting in more than 100 American cities. Literally thousands of people were injured, dozens were killed, but not in Indianapolis. And a member of the Black Radical Action Project, William Crawford, who was standing about 20 feet from Kennedy during the speech, attributes the relative calm in Indianapolis to Kennedy's speech. Now, and this was a probing question, not a hostile question. My wife wanted to know why I found it inspiring, given that I'm so reluctant to feel inspiration. And there's a lot that I could dredge up. I found it inspiring that here was a person who was born in wealth and privilege, who tended to live much of his life with a sense of entitlement, and who really seemed to have something of a revelation, change of heart, and began to feel a tremendous empathy toward the poor and the disenfranchised. The sense that he walked into a tinderbox that really could have gone either way, and that with calm and a kind of quiet bravery, met the moment, lived up to the moment, that he simultaneously talked about the need to move beyond something, and yet was present and alive to the real pain of the moment simultaneously. And yet, when I said to Ellen, but that's not what really inspired me about it. What really inspired me was that I felt it embodied, and a word that we tend to use kind of off the cuff, but it embodied goodness, Goodness. I felt that I was in the presence of something good. And I felt that his effect on the audience and on me was goodifying. I don't think that's a word, but I think there should be. Because I felt goodified by it. And I think the people in the audience felt goodified by it. And I think I go back to it in times of despair and feel good about it, feel goodified by it. And so I ask myself, and I'm still asking myself, what are some other goodifying moments Wherein does one find this inspiration? And one moment that I wanted to share was something that happened a long time ago, probably 30 plus years ago, when Ellen, my wife, my not yet wife, and I were graduate students living in a working class neighborhood outside of Boston with some, there were some colorful figures in the neighborhood. And one of the people who lived there was a teenage boy, William, with Down syndrome. And William was a tremendously sweet boy. He loved the neighborhood pets. He loved our cats. He would walk over to a neighbor's house where a dog was in the backyard and slip dog biscuits through the fence. And William would spend time, sorry about that, a lot of time, blowing bubbles in the neighborhood. You know, and it seemed like hours. I don't think it was hours, but it seemed like he was out there doing that a lot. And so often one would walk out the door or come home from wherever one was, and there would be bubbles in the neighborhood. And William just sort of spreading the bubbles in the neighborhood. And Ellen said to me, we were both reading Eliade at the time, The Sacred and the Profane, and The Myth of the Eternal Return, and stuff like that. And she said, I feel like William is sacralizing the neighborhood with those bubbles. And I don't know if doctrinally, dogmatically, I believed that, if I believe about the interaction of the sacred and the profane and the consecration of sacred space, but I loved that, and it felt right. And I still think about it, and it still feels right. And, you know, it was really nice that a few months later, William was a hero, because Ellen and I had left town for a vacation, and one of our cats was missing. And it was no vacation to be away for a couple of days, and we were set to make arrangements to fly back from Colorado and basically look for Kivo when we got the call that he was found, that William found the cat looking through the window of a neighbor's basement. And so William was the hero. So as I try to calm myself and say, what does one do for inspiration, I'm reminded of how the day after the election of 2016, when we were all horrified and shocked, that my cousin Debbie, who's not my cousin, you know what I mean? I mean, like she's Uncle Harold and Aunt Elaine's daughter, but they're not my aunt and uncle either. She's a performance artist and a playwright in New York. She wrote to me lines from a poem by Bertolt Brecht. I can't pronounce it very well. A 4-line poem that means a lot to me. It actually sounds better in the German than the English, so I'll read the German, but then I'll read it in the English. And my apologies to those who understand German, because my German is not good. But it goes, in den finsteren Zeiten wird da auch gesungen werden, da wird auch gesungen werden von den finsteren Zeiten. Simply, in the dark times, will there also be singing? There will be singing about the dark times.
Thank you so much, John, for your words today. Our community announcements. Next Sunday, December 18th, is the last day to bring items or a check for the Atlanta Community Food Bank. Also, are we safe to do Christmas potluck dinner after the celebration of life on December 25th? If so, there is a board where you can sign up for a dish you would like to bring. It's below the MLK picture back there on the wall. Updates regarding safety are welcome, and there may be a possibility to have an outdoor potluck. But if you want more information, you can see Mary or the members of the membership guild. Our closing congregational song. Jean, what's going to be?
This is something I learned from our founding minister, Lanier Clance, that there's nothing wrong with repeating. So, I want us to do the song we did earlier. And some of you weren't here. So if you all would rise and bind in spirit as you're willing and able. And we'll run through it for their benefit. And this is the first part. We let the love wash over us. We let it be. Right? Okay, and then sing with me on this. All right, so and then another part is we let the love wash over us. We let it be. Okay? And we'll do love, and then we'll do some other keys. And if you hear another harmony note, sing that. And remember, it's the feeling, not hitting the note right. Okay? If I could get everybody to reach up and take a really deep breath. And release. And one more time. Great.
Let
Thank you. God, that was beautiful, you all.
Our closing words for today are returning to our organs of the heart and the lungs. Consider where you were when we began today. And notice now where you are currently in respect to the heart and lungs. And allow that to continue with you for the rest of the day, the rest of the week. And we hope to see you next week when we will be hosting Kodak Harrison with his talk, Refugees in Our World. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.